Mermaid and the Lion. Mermaid and the Lion.
Nobody wants to talk about slavery. Nah, they just want to bury it like it never happened. But not this time. In this moment, we are going to address the situation head on by sharing a unique story of one descendant of enslavers who has connected with the descendants of the human beings his family enslaved. Join the conversation with my wife Angel, Kathy Mabry, Carol Mabry, and Eli Foster in the living room of the slave master's house on Lyon Farm.
Can you tell the folks your name and a little bit about your connection to the Stonecrest community?
So my name is Eli Foster. My mom was born in Atlanta. Her name is Judy Catherine, and then Lyon, Lyon Foster. My mom is a Lion. We are the Lions here within this community has the distinction of this house being the longest standing house that is within a one family from, I think the date is probably closer to 1800, from 1800 to 2007 when a Lion no longer lived here. So my mom's family is the Lyon family here. The Lyon family came to Georgia when my, I guess, great, about 7 greats or whatever back, Joseph Emmanuel Lyon came with the British military in the American Revolutionary War. He was fighting for the British. He was captured. And then when he was captured, he flipped sides because when you get captured, like, you know, what's he going to do, right? Like you stay captured, you change it up. So he flipped sides. So he decided to fight for the American colonists. And so he was in a particular battle, and there's this story about it, but he ends up losing his arm and being on this battlefield for a long time. It's in 1781. The U.S. government granted him 100 acres here in DeKalb County, right here in Stonecrest, in the year 1790. They granted it again in the year 1800. And the thing that's kind of crazy about it is that property didn't even belong to the U.S. government at that point. Right. This was Muskogee territory, Muskogee Creek Nation. Mm-hmm. So the U.S. government was granting something they actually did not have the right to grant at that point. So Georgia holds a land grant following this treaty of 1821 that my understanding is kind of forced on the Muskogee Nation. And then Georgia gives the 100 acres to him that he had already been living on anyways. Mm-hmm. He has a son named George. During the time that George is his son, they expand this plantation. And according to some records, it goes as far as up to 2 miles and goes all along the South River. So his son George is here running this plantation. And according to the census records in 1850, there were 13 enslaved persons here. And the census records in 1860, there were 17 enslaved persons here. Following the Civil War, he dies during the Civil War. 4 of his sons die, and then one of his sons comes back and is here during Reconstruction. His son is here, and then his son after that becomes my grandfather. So that is my connection to this area and to this space. So it is a long tracing back in DeKalb County.
Listening to Mr. Foster was intriguing. But we were also blessed to have Miss Carol and Miss Kathy Mabry join us and share their connection to the farm as descendants of the enslaved. For those listening, Miss Kathy Mabry does not audibly introduce herself, but you will hear her contribute throughout the conversation.
Well, I'm Carol Mabry, and we first discovered this home during the time of our family reunion. And we kept seeing articles about the Lyon plantation. And so we started gathering information to come here, which came out, 2008?
2008.
2008. Yeah. And discovered my mom's grandfather was here. His name was Felix Lyons. And he had a brother named Hill Lyons. and Hill was trustee at Flat Rock United Methodist Church. So I have been trying to contact relatives on his side recently, and I've talked to one lady, and she said she knew about the plantation. And I told her, I said, well, we'll get together and talk some more to get more information about, our family so we can get together for another reunion. So her name is Michelle Lyons, and she lives in Stone Mountain. And I just happened to find her on Facebook. So when we planned our family reunion, everybody came. Of course, we left with tears in our eyes because of when we went downstairs, and everybody said, they slept in here? And we like, well, I think they did. And then we took a tour of the plantation, and then we went on to our banquet after that.
And cemetery.
And
We
the
took a
cemetery.
tour of the cemetery.
I didn't go to the cemetery, so they were telling me it was how it was situated. The Indians always get a high place to bury the people.
Right.
And
They felt
saw-
they were closer to the heavens if they got on high ground.
Right.
And how did you guys determine and find out that you were Lyons and that your family actually worked on this plantation?
Based on talking to my mother, and she was said, I asked her about one of her brothers. His name was Felix. And I said, who was he named after? And she said, his grandfather. And I said, so he was out at Flat Rock? She said, we lived out at Flat Rock. So the connection, we kept digging a little deeper. I kept going to Ancestry.com. I go to another site and another site and another site until I actually connected everything.
Right.
And then when I put in names of people, they would come up in that same site. And that's how I connected everybody. Plus, they had sisters' names that my mom had sisters with those same names. So I knew my grandmother named some of them after them.
When we were on the family reunion tour, we toured and went to the archives and museum up the street from here. And we saw a lot of our family members in the slide presentation. And he said, those are your relatives. That's your grandfather. That's your great-great-grandfather. So we were able to connect by seeing, they did have records from back then. Because a lot of people then didn't keep physical records or photographs.
Yes.
So we were able to make the connection from there. Plus, I think there was connection with the Creek Indians, as Eli has mentioned. So we have a very rich history that we're still researching.
As soon as Mrs. Caffey stopped speaking, a harsh reality hit me. Reality of how much history has been stolen from Black people. Angel took the opportunity to voice her thoughts as the conversation continued.
Absolutely. And that's the one thing about being a person of color. And I just want to do that comparison. It was so easy for Mr. Foster. Like, he was like, yep, I can go back all the way back to my great, right? Grandfather fighting in the British War. And we're like, hey, we're still researching. We're still trying to learn that. But with all that being said, you guys found each other.
Yes.
We did.
Even beyond, like, we're still trying to find who we are, where we came from, what our name is. Are we Nigerian? Are we Ghanaian? Are we from Cameroon? Right? But you guys were able to find each other through being an enslaved person's descendant, and by you being the family that owned enslaved people. And can you tell me a little bit about your inspiration of wanting to reconnect and understand your family's history?
Great question. So I think it's really important, the point that you just made, as a individual in power in our society, a white individual. So my mom had talked when I was young about this book that my family has. So I brought it here. It's typed on an old typewriter, and it was.
We're gonna show it to you guys.
It was but it's not really a book. It's just paper. It's like I got copies. I don't have that, right? But so it's typed on this typewriter. And it goes back to 1972, and there was somebody who did oral histories, and they compiled everything. I never even saw it. So I didn't know, which I think is a fascinating wrinkle to this, that as a white individual in this society who's empowered to have stuff, easy access, it carried no weight for me at all. Like I wasn't like, I need to know about my history. I didn't, right? So the impetus for this relationship for me, in 2020, watching and being a part of a continual movement in our society for a greater sense of racial justice. My wife has always grounded herself in her ancestors. So my wife is a Black woman, and she talks about standing on the shoulders of her grandfather, who was a sharecropper.
Right.
And my wife recently got her doctorate from Alabama.
Congratulations.
Yes.
Yeah. Wait, woo-hoo.
Yeah,
Like, no, all the applause. Like,
And
Black girl magic.
Yes, yeah, go ahead, yeah. And so that was her dad's dream, and he didn't get a chance, right? There are lots of obstacles, but she is literally the embodiment of her ancestors' biggest dreams.
Right.
That's my wife, right? So she'll talk about this, right? And she'll share it with me. And I thought, you know what, if we're talking about digging deeper into understanding our story as a country, who we are, right? So there's a documentary just made in 2001 called Who We Are, the Story of Race in America. But who we are, I need to do what my wife does. I need to figure out where I come from, right? I need to do my research. Right. It was not hard. I Googled Lyon, family, Georgia, and there was a study in 2009 by Georgia State on this piece of property, because this piece of property was sold by the Lyon family at that time in 2003 to DeKalb County for $500,000. So Georgia State did a study on the house to kind of whatever. And so all the stuff is in there. And that family history that I'm talking about, they used it for that study. So I'm digging and I'm reading about it and I'm understanding sort of my role in this, right? So when I come across my role in this, I also come across Flat Rock community that's been mentioned. So for those of you who don't know, in the Stonecrest area, Flat Rock community is unbelievable. It's unbelievable. There are these 5 white families, is my understanding, the Souths and the Waits and the Lyon families, that owned the vast majority of the property that was around here. And there's this tiny community of Black resilience and joy and family life in Flat Rock, which is even hard to say where it was because some maps had it moving around, like the 1840 map has it moving around, right? Correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, right? So I discovered this Flat Rock community, which is founded on really these descendants of these 5 families of formerly enslaved persons coming together to build this sense of community. So this Flat Rock community has an archives and has a museum that we can go and visit today. And this building is a part of the tour for it. It's unbelievable, right? So I find that and I go on Facebook. You were talking about Facebook earlier. So I go on Facebook and I see Carol Mabry. Did I pronounce it right?
Yes, right.
Okay. Carol Mabry says, my however many great grandfathers worked on that plantation. And I said, wait a second, what? Right? So right. Okay. His name was James Lyons, right? Okay.
That's right.
So I started to type a message in Facebook. My wife like, slow your roll, brother. I don't know if anybody, if they're like, whoa, we want to see this. Right. So slow down. So I slowed down and listened. And I got in touch with Flat Rock Archives, talked to the executive director at the time, talked about kind of the history of Flat Rock and understand. So then I finally said, well, let me just reach out to Carol. And I sent her a Facebook message. She sent it back. We exchanged phone numbers. And then we just started talking. And we talked about family history. She asked me about, was your family ever in South Carolina? And I was like, actually, Joseph Emmanuel, because she was like, I met some Lyons in South Carolina. And I was like, actually, Joseph Emmanuel Lyon was in Charleston before he came here. And she was like, oh my gosh, they are my cousins. I thought they were my cousins, right? And so she's telling me about Lyon with an S, that is the Black side of the family. Lyon without an S, that was the white side of the family, right? So we're exchanging this information and going back and forth. And for me, it was unbelievable the amount of graciousness that she had with me. It was unbelievable. She is a gracious, kind, and caring woman. And so is her sister, Kathy. Because I'm not sure if I were in their situation, I'd be so gracious for someone who is a descendant of enslavers reaching out to me. But it is her graciousness, her kindness, and her understanding and having dignity and care in the process of us building this relationship. So the driving factor for me, I don't know about y'all, but I saw Biden's inauguration and Amanda Gorman, right? She's up there, right? Like everybody, like, oh, Amanda Gorman, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So Amanda Gorman, in The Hill We Climb, has a line that says, "It's because being American is more than the past being American is more than the pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it."
Yes.
So the driving factor for me was looking at these two words that have come out of responsibility. How do I, as a descendant of an enslaver, take responsibility for the actions of my ancestors? And repair. How do I help make repair in this process? So it is helpful to build a relationship, but I need to do more than build a relationship. I need to push more into the components of responsibility and repair.
Right.
We don't have enough time. We don't have enough, but I wanted one special thing that we talked about, the white side of the family being Lyon without an S, and the Black family being Lyons with an S. If you think about it, ownership and belonging to, that S comes in. So you are the Lyons is because you belonged to the lion. And that is just so very interesting to me. So when I think about it, was Joneses, were they Joan and then Joneses? You know, like, right. And now I gotta know.
Yeah.
Why you send me down a rabbit hole?
So my wife's maiden last name was Reese with an S.
Yes.
They're enslavers with Reese with a C. So they changed it from a C to an S. So they weren't Reese's like Reese's Pieces, but they were Reese with a C to Reese with an S. So so this piece of the story, I mean, that's Malcolm Little says, wait a second, Malcolm X, right? Like it's the story of identity and how we understand identity when we've been forged into something that we were forced to.
And to build on what he said about Carol's compassion, because the two of them have communicated, like he said.
Yes.
And I was just brought in toward the end of last year or whenever, and she was talking, Eli says, I said, who is Eli? I would always hear Eli this, Eli then, Carmen this, and Carmen. Now, who are they? So when she introduced him to me, we have taken him in, he has taken us in as family.
Yes.
So when we see each other, we're going, hey, cousin Eli. He's going, hey, cousin Kathy. Hey, cousin Carol. So if no one gets anything out of this, but to see that we can come together, we can build a positive relationship with each other. It does not have to be, oh, he did this to me, I don't want to talk to him. This family did this. We have to go beyond that if we are to survive.
Absolutely. That's true. Keyword, survival, right? And as human beings, right? My mom is going to kill me for saying this. The other day, she tried to convince me how we were animals, right? We're animals, right? But that's the whole entire thing. Humans, we do it in what we consider a more dignified or refined or civilized way, but we're all just trying to survive within community, survive as outcasts of community. And what you guys have demonstrated in this relationship is that it's greater to survive within community.
Yes,
So I have to ask Ms. Carol, the first time you read the message, what went through your mind?
I read it and I said, how did he find me? And then he said, you mentioned something about being a white boy, and you said, I'm calling. If you don't answer my message, I understand. So I went back and I read it again, and I contacted you then, and we've been contacting each other ever since.
That is so beautiful, so beautiful. And I think I can definitely believe when they say that they have integrated as family, because we have a birthday coming up for your mother, right? So can you talk to me a little bit about your mother and her experiences and what it meant to you for her to share with you your family's history and legacy? Because sometimes in our communities, pain is so great when we think about our history and what we've gone through, that they don't even want to talk about their youth and their childhood. And that's why so much is lost, because it's not that we don't want to share. We don't want to have legacy. It's we don't want to pass on that pain. We don't want to pass on that Uncle Joe was chased off, or, all that stuff is difficult, but it's important. So can you tell me a little bit about growing up and your mom reminding you who you were and how that was important and made you want to search?
Let you answer that.
She tossed that to me because I'm the oldest, I guess. I'm supposed to know more. But as we were growing up, we would often ask questions about, did you do this and this and this when you were growing up? She would tell us about, well, they were sharecroppers and they moved from place to place. Flat Rock is one of the places they moved to. They were here, they moved to an area in Gwinnett County. I think they were area in what is now known as Rockdale, because at one time it was one big county known as Henry, and then it split into DeKalb, Gwinnett, Rockdale. So they moved within that area, and she said we worked plantation out at, and I went, plantation? She said, yes. We were not slaves, but we were sharecroppers who were, in a sense, behaved like they were slaves.
Let's pause right there. Miss Carol and Kathy's mother is making 90 years old this year. This means she was born in 1932. 67 years after slavery was abolished, 12 years after women were given the right to vote, 3 years after Dr. Martin Luther King was born, and the very same year the Tuskegee experiment began. We generally can remember vividly from around age 3, which means Mrs. Mabry is likely recalling memories from 1935 onward, which confirms that sharecropping and slave-like behavior was prevalent in the South all the way through the Civil Rights era, which really isn't that long ago. Miss Kathy continued to share her mother's experience.
So when she said we had relatives in Flat Rock, we talked to who's caretaker of the museum, and he would talk about a school that they had out here. And most of the Blacks then went to that school. I think it was Flat Rock.
Flat Rock.
It was, which is why this one is now called Flat Rock Elementary. He wanted an extension of the history. And that one night, it got burned. It burned to the ground. They later found out, I don't know if it was the KKK or whoever.
Right.
Burned the school to the ground. So that took part of their history away. He said we had to rebuild. But when she talks about, your father did this, my father is originally from Rockdale County. And I think he was part of a sharecropper's family also. And as we grew up and she would tell us, your family did this, we couldn't find very many photographs. We couldn't find very much written down. Everything was oral history. And as the generations passed, we lost some of that because we didn't get any of the history from the older people before they passed away. So she now being the 90-year-old, about to be at the end of this month, who is passing down the history, we're trying to write down as much as we can or record as much as we can. Her brother, who still lives, he's 87. He doesn't remember a lot because he was the baby boy. And as the baby boy, he said he didn't do a lot of things that she did as the baby girl. She got a lot of history. And she will ask him, if you remember this, he goes, no, I don't remember that, But a lot of the things that she remembers, because my sister lives with her, she gives to her the information. So I don't hear a lot of what she's able to talk about.
We had what family reunion was that, 2012?
2012.
We did an interview with my mom, her brother, and her sister. She died recently at 96 years age. But we asked questions. How did they go from place to place? Well, we went wherever there was work. And we would pack. We said, well, you say you lived in Redan, you lived in Snellville, you lived here. How many times did you move? Wherever there was work, we would pack up and go and stay there. And when that was over, we move again. And so we would ask all kind of questions like, when they would work the fields, my uncle would play sick. So it would take my mother and her other sister to bring him home. And when he get home, his mom said, what's wrong with Horace? Oh, he fell sick and we brought him home and said they would stay. He didn't want to work. in the cotton fields. So he would say stuff like that to us now. I didn't want to work out there, so I'd play sick.
The truth at last. No. It's kind of funny, like when you think about it as a kid, you're gonna take these secrets to your grave, and then you're like, oh, you know what? I'm grown. They can't spank me. You know what? I did that. I did. I broke that vase. And that's what Horace said, letting us know, like, I wasn't gonna be out there. With my grandmother explained to me, because they're from Mississippi area, that picking cotton was difficult when you were a young person because your hands really getting inside of that bulb and those like almost like thorns in there. Right. So trying to grab it was difficult. And then they would make it hard for the older kids who knew what they were doing because they would pick off the top. And then they had to come back in there and dig their hands in to get the rest of the cotton because they needed that weight. So you know what, Horace, shame on you. You know, but you know what? No, it's good you went home and didn't leave the half-picked cotton, right? So no, that is amazing and that is beautiful to be able to share, and that now you're able to document, because the access and the ability to read and write and document was so missed. So having this is awesome, and happy, happy, happy birthday as well. So the next thing that I really kind of want to transition us into, thinking of repair. I'm just curious, did you guys feel that you were owed reparations or repair after discovering?
Oh, that's a good question. How do you answer that?
It's kind of hard to put a value on, a monetary value on it. Because we were brought here, at least our ancestors were. And we don't know what transpired all through the communications to bring them here. It's almost similar to what's happening in America now, taking immigrants from one place, putting them on a plane or a bus to another place, but in their way, they're getting money for about 8 months or so. I don't know how much, but we were brought here, and I guess with the communications between the slave owners and the slaves themselves, it probably was never discussed about we need to be paid, because it's kind of hard to set a figure on that.
It's incredibly hard. And
being brought here as workers or laborers, that's the difference to me. You were brought from another country to this one as labor. The people that are moving now as immigrants are being moved out because the powers that be do not want them there. And they're not taken to another place, essentially to be laborers. So there are those people who think, yeah, we should be paid reparations, we should get this. But like she said, how do you put a money value on it? How do you put a money value on the lives of people who spent their lifetime working for someone else, or who spent their lifetime being nonverbal? And if you opened your mouth, you were criminalized for it. So how do you pay someone for the time that they spent to do things? So I guess the best we can do is how we are doing now, learning to get along with each other and learning how
help
to
each other.
Yes, that's our history, and unfortunately, it's a sad part of history. We have to endure in a history, and I, as an educator, that's one that I probably would get out of school, be put out of school for, because that's something I would want to teach, because you need to know about this, so that it doesn't repeat itself.
Absolutely, and that's why history is important.
At this moment, Mrs. Caffey and Carol's kindness compelled Angel to ask everyone's thoughts on the destruction of historic monuments celebrating the Confederacy and other symbols of racism. Angel posed a question to Mr. Eli first, and he took the conversation right back to where it should be: reparations and repair.
So I will start with you, Mr. Eli.
Respectfully, I want to go back to this last question.
Sure.
So the last question about reparations and how to put a figure on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're sitting here in this house, right? The foundation of this house has large granite stones. The large granite stones came from just across the river on Panola, what's called Panola Mountain today.
Right.
Years ago, my mom said it was called Little Stone Mountain.
Yeah.
Oh,
So those rocks that were brought here were brought by enslaved persons. Literally, the foundation of this house that we are in was built on the backs of labor of enslaved persons. Your question, I think, is really important. And I think
Yes.
it's very difficult for Carol and Kathy to answer, and it's very difficult for me to answer. But I have a responsibility to my family.
Mhm.
Okay, I have a responsibility to it doesn't matter what Carol and Kathy say
Mm-hmm.
from, they could say 5 million, they could say 100 million, they could say, well, let's just get along, right? Like they could say whatever. I still have a responsibility to my family.
Mhm.
So I have, I'm not on the best of terms with all of my family right now because so there was an email exchange where my family wanted us to honor the history behind the writing of the Star Spangled Banner, and it was entitled "Honor Our Forefathers."
Right.
Okay.
Mhm.
So I was like, well, if you want to talk about our forefathers, let's talk about them, right? So I'm in the midst of all this research that I just told you about, Joseph Daniel Lyon. I was like, well, this is who our forefathers are.
Right. I read
Our forefathers are a man who came here and has stolen property that the U.S. government
Right.
shouldn't have given to
Right.
begin with. So on stolen property with stolen people, right?
Mhm.
So at the point with certain family members, I said, I passed on different websites about reparations. I was like, what we should do is we should help with voting rights in Georgia, because why is it that you who live in this county of Georgia right now takes you 10 minutes to vote when people who live in Atlanta, it takes them 5 hours to vote.
Mhm.
So that's one. And I said, what we should also do is we should talk about leaving our financial legacy. So when you have this was one of my wealthier family members, like when you have your whatever that you're passing on to the children, you should pass it on to Flat Rock Archives. You should pass it on to this community that was a community of resilience in the face of our oppression, right?
Mhm.
So for me personally, I feel there is a responsibility, right? So there's a responsibility for me. I was not there. I wasn't there.
Yeah.
But I carry within my body, I carry within my blood, I carry within my DNA the legacy of oppression.
Mhm.
And if I want to take responsibility for it and make repair, it takes active steps in me holding my family accountable.
Mhm.
So
Right.
for me, I think the question is different. These women are gracious.
Mhm.
I think you need more white individuals who can trace their history to say, repair needs to continue to look like me
Right.
holding my family accountable, that we don't hide the history of what our family has done, and that we take responsibility for it. And we then hand over the story to the descendants of the enslaved to say, hey, how can we move forward together? Because
Mhm.
I know what I am bearing in my body is not right. That's where I am on that. Aside from I'll jump on the monument one if you want, but that's where I am on that one.
I just have one thing to
Well
say.
said.
Oh, well, thank you.
Can we get a
said.
round of applause? Right?
Yes.
But Mr. Eli and I have talked on the phone a couple of times,
Uh-huh.
and he admonished me for saying that he was special. But this is why.
Mhm.
What you just said, many people like, I am trying to remain a professional because I'm not going to cry. But what you just said, so many people do not want to take accountability,
Right.
period, for what they do,
Right.
for their actual actions, what they have done.
Mhm.
And you are choosing to take accountability to show your children, to show your wife and your family.
Mhm.
It is time to make a difference. And this is how I could do that through building community. And I
Mhm.
thank the three of you for being here to just share this story. Because I know we have like a precursor where we're going to show the house and talk about it. But we are sitting, I am sure, in a home where many people cried for multiple reasons. And the fact that you are willing to take accountability for that and in the best way that you can,
Mhm.
stand up and say that I'm sorry.
So Angel got a bit choked up because it was magnificent to experience at least one non-POC person who recognized that there is real, lasting pain that remains from slavery, even today. But we still had that monument question that we wanted answered.
I think this is a great opportunity, and I would love to get all three of your opinions. How do you feel about the taking down of many of the monuments that were dedicated to Confederate figures and heroes during the war, like, considering on that side, or people who have obviously caused harm to people of color being carved into Stone Mountain and all that, all around Georgia. Do you think they should remain so that we remember? Or do you think they should be taken down because it's disrespectful to those who were harmed by their hand?
My first reaction was, yay, take them all down. but when you look at taking them away, and some places they are storing them, and some places they're moving them to different locations so that they're all in one location. If you're going to do that, then you need to erect statues of the enslaved people that you had contact with and that you built your history on. So when you look at that and they're talking about, well, let's take down Harriet Tubman. No, leave Harriet Tubman up and put up, you need to leave Martin Luther King, you need to leave Julian Bond and all the rest of these people. If you're going to keep those statues up, then we need to put up more of the African Americans. So if you're taking down the statues of people who were part of the Confederacy, and they're saying, well, some places, I think they all put them in one location, or they're putting them in a park or something, or whatever they're doing with them, then that needs to be told to the descendants or people who are walking around that park why you removed them from wherever they were. This is what they did to the enslaved people. And that's why the history is so important. That's why you get people who are saying, well, we're not an allegiance to the national anthem or to the flag. We're an allegiance to ourselves mainly as people. And that's why we need to move the statue wherever it is that it was moved to, or dismantle or whatever.
I'm going to say mic drop on that. I don't think anybody else, unless you want to, Miss Carol, because I'm thinking that we're going to go ahead and mic drop on that, because you touch so many parts and pieces that we're going to let's rewind that if you didn't get it, because, go ahead, Eli.
I want to add just many of the statues that are up were not built in the 1860s immediately following the Civil War. They were built in the 1890s or the 1900s. They were built following Reconstruction. They were built following the ruling Plessy v. Ferguson in 1896. They were built to send a message to Black people that you are not welcome and that we are having an Old South antebellum praise, right? They were built because they thought it wanted to make things great again, right? Like, that's what they were built for.
I love my red hat.
So if we're talking about the purpose of statues, I live in Nashville. We had a statue right in where our legislature meets of Nathan Bedford Forrest, the founder of the KKK, the murderer at Fort Pillow who massacred Black soldiers, the slave trader before that. He's in our state standards. I was a 5th grade social studies teacher. Teach about famous Tennesseans, Nathan Bedford Forrest, right? So I taught about famous Tennesseans, Nathan Bedford Forrest. I didn't teach. He was just a cavalry general, right? I taught about the massacre at Fort Pillow. It's in the standard, right? I'm going to teach about it, right? Okay. So it's a big fight, and we finally get his bust down, and it's a huge fight that took like 40 years. It shouldn't take that long. So for me, the question of statues is, here's the question. I was watching the Who Are We? The Story of Race in America by the guy whose name I can't remember, right? So it's a documentary. It's on
Netflix, right?
Netflix. Yeah. And he's quoting George Orwell. And George Orwell, the author of 1984, Animal Farm, right? He says, he who controls the present controls the past, and he who controls the past controls the future. So it's how are we telling the stories about where we've gotten to, and the purpose of the vast majority of Confederate stories of statues are glorifying that. They are not telling it so that way we know the history.
Right.
They're glorifying it. And when we talk about this house that we're in, I feel a tremendous amount of shame being in this house. A tremendous amount of shame. I know that my ancestors brutally beat, killed, and raped people in this house and on these grounds. I know this. So when we talk about that, I feel shame. And I understand how other ancestors, other relatives of mine would want this flattened to the ground so we don't remember it. But But the feeling of having literally knowing that right below us were enslaved persons were forced to live stacked on top of each other.
Right. And look like balled up in children's-sized beds.
That is still here, not to be glorified, but to remember carries unbelievable weight. So when I'm sitting here with my cousins who have so graciously welcomed me into their family, I know that this needs to stay as a remembrance. This is how it should be with the story of the oppressed persons taking more center stage as opposed to glorifying. So any statues that glorifies, that's enough, right? But where we're telling the whole story, that carries a different role. But the vast majority, the big old one on Stone Mountain with the right, the vast majority are for the purpose of glorifying, and they don't belong. Sorry, I know you might.
I don't know.
But I want to get in there too.
No, it's a second mic. We have like 4 mics, so I guess we all get a turn. We can just keep on dropping them, right?
In one of our previous discussions with Eli, he mentioned a story similar to so many in this time. The story of theft and deceit against the formerly enslaved, which also brings a very likely theory about Flat Rock to the forefront.
So with that being said, when we had our most recent conversation, you mentioned, I'm not sure if it was Miss Carol, Miss Kathy, kind of talked about, I think it was James Lyon coming back and purchasing land here.
Was it James or Hill?
Hill.
Let her tell the story. Go ahead.
Hill was able to come back here and purchase land. Can you tell us about that story?
From what I understand, he purchased land and
from
the Lion.
Keep going.
But they came back and got it, right? They took it.
Tell the details. No. I want you to tell exactly what happened, because this is the part that for me is so special. Like when I heard about Flat Rock Elementary School and the barns being burned, I didn't know that story. I didn't know that story.
Johnny told us
now,
that.
Y'all go ahead. Tell that.
I'm going to say this, that this podcast is not PC, meaning it's not politically correct. You don't have to curb your storytelling because we are concerned about not being able to air or broadcast. We air and we're going to broadcast everything.
When we came out here, we did notice there were 2 roads connected to our family. There's a Ragsdale Road and there's a Lyons Road. Well, we claimed the Lyons Road with the S. So we said that's our road, but it was supposed to have been Lyon. So where the cemetery is and all that area was owned by Hill Lyons. And somewhere during the time, the Lyon family came back and got it. From what I
took it from y'all.
Took it
so,
from
So it was sold fairly to Hill. And then my, what years? 1910? 19?
Had to have been around that time.
Okay. So 1910, somewhere in that area. 19-teens, 20s, late in the 20s?
Yeah. Had to have been.
Okay. So somebody in my family sold property to Hill legitimately. He's working, living on the property, and then somebody in my family goes back and steals the property back from Hill. Is that illegitimately steals it? Okay.
And that's where those houses are sitting. When you come in here, that new subdivision, all that was his. That's what Johnny told us.
What is the park or something that's over there too? Also,
they're building some new homes over there, and the cemetery. There's a marker that says Flat Rock Historic Cemetery.
And that land.
That's what he had.
We'll try to see if we can catch a shot. If not, let me just say this. Shameless plug. Come here. Come to the Flat Rock Archives. Come to the Arabia Alliance and National Heritage Area. Come walk these grounds. I promise you, you are going to have a feeling that you have never felt before if you are taking it seriously. And if you come specifically to this home, there's information here where you can walk up and see, you could come inside if you make an appointment. But you need to come because there's not very many places like this in its authentic state. That you could go on plantation tours down in Savannah and places like that, but it is not this. Come, feel.
We hope that these words encourage you to learn more about the Flat Rock Archives and Arabia Mountain National Heritage Area. At this time, the conversation continued, leading into a discussion regarding the historic cemetery.
To get to the cemetery, and there are a lot of grave markers back there at the time that our ancestors were buried that are not like regular tombstones now. They may have just a year. You don't know the date or anything. They may just have a first name because that's all they knew at that time. So there were a lot of people, I think Eli mentioned, that came through Georgia State, and they went through that cemetery and they tried to do a lot of dusting and marking or whatever.
I'm going to jump in real quick. I'm
Please.
sorry.
No.
We've almost lost the cemetery twice.
Yeah.
So back it was 2006 or 2005. It should have never been sold the way it was sold. And this lady owns a part of the property, and she's reached a verbal agreement with Flat Rock Archives. But we almost lost it then. And there's it was on NPR, the fight for it, and with the property, right? We almost lost it then. We also almost just lost it last month because we had a situation where we didn't realize about property taxes related to the cemetery in the state of Georgia. So we were able to, as the Flat Rock Archives, back pay on the property taxes that hadn't been paid. So we saved it. So it's twice that we've almost lost it. Like they could have done anything with that property. And you are talking about persons who are there dating to 1840 or 1820, or it is an unbelievable piece. But it's not a cemetery it's not like green grass. It's in the middle of the woods.
Yeah.
Like trees fall and break the markers. Like it is holy ground in a way that is hard to understand because enslaved persons were not typically given that dignity. So this Flat Rock community and this person whose name has not come up yet, but Reverend T.A. Bryant, who purchased property and was able to build a homestead and then do something on a smaller scale, but similar to Tulsa, Greenwood area in Oklahoma, parcel it up to that way give ownership and land ownership and home ownership for Black folks that were in that area. This Flat Rock community is special for that. I just want to grab that on the arc.
No, please.
But I also want to back up. Anytime. I want to back up on this. So the year is important for me because, like I said, I read about my family stuff now, right? So here's the scenario. So I talked about my family. So you've got the primary enslaver, George, and his son is also George. He was a cabinet maker. He comes out and takes the property, and he has a son named Wallace Kirk. So Wallace Kirk was here at the property during that time. And Wallace Kirk was a kid. I wouldn't be here today if it were not for this story. Wallace Kirk is a kid, and he goes out with a formerly enslaved woman named Mary, her son named Thee. Right? I don't know who this Lyons is, but Lyons. They go out and he gets bitten by a poisonous snake and he is going to die. And Wallace, a formerly enslaved person, his mom was enslaved, saves my great-grandfather's life, dragging him back here. And they are able to nurse him back to health, and he walks with a limp his whole life. So I'm literally here today because of the graciousness and kindness of Thee Lyons, a formerly enslaved, a child of a formerly enslaved woman. It's an unbelievable story. Wow. So I'm circling back. I promise I'm getting to you. So when we get to Hill Lyons, so Wallace Kirk has my grandfather in 1912. My grandfather's 10 in 1922. This is why the year is so important for me. Wallace Kirk is working on the farm and they're on the plantation and they're cutting a tree down. And the tree falls on him and kills him, and he dies, right? So he has my granddad, who's 10 at the time, and his older brother, George, who ends up working out here for a very long time, right? His older brother, George, who's 20 at the time. And that's it, right? It's the moms, right? But it's whatever, rural, it's the male sons who kind of the ownership, right? They almost lose this in 1922. His little sister buys it, but then the South family buys it for him, another formerly enslaved family in this area. So it's this connection of white property ownership historically, right? So the South family buys it, sells it back to him, right? So he's got to pay the South family back. He needs the money. So he's lost his dad.
No, that's
Right?
what he
He's
said
lost
with
his
the Hill.
dad. His dad maybe was the one who sold the property to James. I don't know. Right? But
Or
when you
Hills.
put the-
Hills, right.
With Hill.
With
Sorry,
Hill.
with Hill.
With
But when you
Hill.
put the
That's
piece of the
what I was
puzzle
putting it
together, he says,
Uh-huh.
where can I get the money from?
So
Right?
he sold the
Right.
property.
So I didn't know any of this story. I don't know any of this. I'm piecing together my pieces. But when you talk about the story with Hill, when the times match up, where's he getting the money from to pay back the sales? Maybe he gets the money from selling the property to Hill, which he goes back and then takes the property back from Hill, right?
Uh-huh.
So then I want to circle back to one other thing. I'm so sorry. But this is the last circle.
Good.
This is the last circle for
good.
me. When they told me the story about the elementary school getting burned,
Mhm.
and they told me the story about barns getting burned,
Mhm.
Kathy and Carol are always so gracious. And they say things like, they did this. I said, wait, who's the they, right?
Sure did.
So they said they, right? So when I look at my own family and I piece together this story of Hill Lyons and the way that my family did, which I never heard from my side of the family. I went to my mom. I said, Mom, how's this relationship work out, white, black, historically for you? And my mom shares stories. She grew up in Atlanta, and the school she was in was integrating at the time.
Mhm.
Okay, so it's during desegregation.
Right.
And she tells me a story that like her dad refused to eat at restaurants because they served black people.
Uh-huh.
So they're on the wrong side of this, right?
Mhm.
So I said, interesting. So I say, wait a second. Your family, my family, is benefiting from what is happening to Hill. My family is struggling for money. My family may view T.A. Bryan as a competition,
Mhm.
right? It's possible and or likely that
Participate.
my grandfather was one of the ones who burned the
Burned down,
school
uh-huh.
and burned the barns down. And I said, what do you think about that, Mom? And she didn't like it because we don't like to write whatever.
Right.
But I said, it makes sense, right?
Okay.
It makes sense.
Mhm.
And I am still trying to figure out, again, from the lens of responsibility and repair, it's not just the damage that my family did enslaving others, it's the continual
Countless.
damage
Mhm.
through Jim Crow, it's the continual damage through property seizure, it's the continual damage that we did that I think me being able to hear from Carol and Kathy, I'd have never heard that otherwise and never been able to put those pieces to the puzzle together. So I'm so grateful for them to be able to help me put the pieces of the puzzle together.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Listen, we're not done. There's no way we could possibly be done, but we got to switch locations. So we're going to talk about repair, reparations, and restorations when we come back at the Flat Rock
A
Archives.
different kind of 3 R's.
Yeah, right. There it is. Right. Restore, rebuild. No, these are some more important. No, they're equally as important as ours. Right. So catch you on the next side.
You may recall Eli mentioning T.A. Bryant earlier in the conversation. He was a pillar in the Flat Rock community, known as one of the earliest black settlements in Georgia. His family has donated his homestead as the museum known as the Flat Rock Archives. We'll rejoin the conversation with Mr. Eli, paying homage to the space we were in.
I want to acknowledge first the space that we're in, right? So this is the Flat Rock Archives was homestead started by T.A. Bryant. So we talked earlier about Flat Rock as a community, a place of black excellence, a place that was like Black Wall Street, Greenwood, Tulsa. There are many of these black communities in the United States during this period, right? During the period of Jim Crow. And I just want to acknowledge what he did in being able to purchase the acreage, being able to parcel it up, and being able to continue to create an enclave of black excellence in the midst of migration. So you've got the Great Migration occurring as black families are moving out for safety. He created this for safety from white oppression and Jim Crow.
We want to take a moment to encourage everyone to tour the Flat Rock Archives, which includes the tour of Lion Farm Plantation, to learn about the inspiration and brilliant history of Flat Rock, T.A. Bryant's legacy, and a host of other influential leaders who built an affluent black community right here in Stonecrest backyard. Please visit www.flatrockarchives.com for touring and donation opportunities. Now back to the story at hand. We wanted to visit the Flat Rock Archive for the next part of the conversation because Eli had a very special gift to share with the archives, and Miss Carol and Kathy, his cousins, were there to support him in that moment.
So here's where we were going. So I'm on this journey and I'm learning more about my family. And it was in a conversation with my mom where I found out that so my mom is at a school that is integrating, right? So the school's named Southwest. And if you go and look back at the yearbooks, the Southwest yearbook in 1962 is completely white. And the Southwest yearbook in 73 is completely black, right? So there's this period in between where it's integrating before white flight. And my mom is there and its integration is occurring around her. Desegregation is occurring around her. And her family, like many other families, responded with white flight. He chose not to eat at restaurants because they served black patrons. So I find this out because I'd never known this, right? This is not a conversation I have with my mom. So I find this out in the midst of kind of asking all these questions and following the murder of George Floyd. So I'm asking her these questions. And before I had gotten married, I got one heirloom after he died. So when my grandfather died, it was his wedding ring set that he had given to my mom, who was the youngest child. So she had kind of two sets with this. So the ring that was there was my grandfather's that he had given to my grandmother when he proposed. It was her engagement ring. So when I was planning on getting married to my wife and propose, she wanted a different type of diamond in the middle. I had a round one. She wanted a princess cut. So I was in Philadelphia at the time and I was able to purchase a diamond. So I had one placed in there and sent the other diamond to my sister so she could have a piece of it too. So I give this ring to my wife and propose, and she wears it for 17 years of our marriage. We've been married now almost 19, a little bit over 18 and a half. And she wears it, and she's hearing the story about the history of this ring and the history of how my grandfather felt about black individuals, at least as it related to that situation with the restaurants. And we then had a discussion about how can we recapture, how can we repair? I'm going to keep using that word. How can I be responsible and how can we repair? So we had a discussion about donating it to the Flat Rock Archives and talking to Carol and Kathy and continuing to work this journey with my newfound cousins. We made the decision. So we donated it, the ring, so that way it would be a part of the story of repair, right? It's valuable, but it's not that valuable, right? I don't know, $3,000, $4,000, right? Whatever, right? But the value is, I am literally saying again, as someone who in my being, who carries within my DNA this responsibility, I'm saying I will commit to making these pieces right. So on the podcast today, I've brought this ring, which will be on display at the Flat Rock Archives, here with me. And so I just wanted to show it and bring it. So this is got it in my pocket here. Well, there's my phone. Shh, don't look. Okay.
He's donating a phone too.
Hey. So this is the display thing. So this was the ring, and it has a different diamond in the middle. So this was it, Miss Carol. This was my grandfather's and my wife's and my grandmother's, and now will be on display at Flat Rock Archives.
Okay.
So, Miss Carol, we already know your stance is we can't put a dollar on it.
Mm-hmm.
And to Eli's point, it is not like, oh, this is 25 carats and this is going to change the whole community through the donation, but the legacy and the history that he's returning. How does that make you feel when you think of him trying to make this gesture in the form of repair?
I think it's wonderful because, like you said, the history is behind it. You know, coming through your family, coming to the Flat Rock Archives to be on display, to let you know that you are in the process of repairing the history with the ones that stayed at the Flat Rock Plantation. And I think that's wonderful.
I think it is wonderful also, since I get a chance to say so.
Many would view this donation as incredibly kind, but would everyone believe that Mr. Eli Foster, the descendant of enslavers and confirmed racist, was genuine? So Angel, being Angel, started asking nosy questions.
Your wife, number one, she's like, yeah, go ahead, take the ring and donate it. Did you replace that ring? So out of the blue, I know.
No, that's a really good question. So, not really. She wore this like plastic thing around for a while, but then we were in Mexico. So I told you earlier that my wife graduated with her doctorate and like, yay. So one of the things we wanted to do was take our kids, international. So we took them to Puerto Vallarta. So we're in Puerto Vallarta, we're on a tour, and we're like at this jewelry place, and that's all my son, my middle child, he's 12. That's all he wanted to do was get some bling. That's all he wanted to do. Like that's all he wanted. So he's got like a little bracelet, right? So we're there, and then like my daughter's like, wait a second, how can I get in on that action, right? So then I have another son, and he's like, me too, right? So all this is going down, and I'm with my mother-in-law, and she's learned that the way to best negotiate is to bring me in because I speak some Spanish. So she brings me in for the negotiations, and like she acts like she doesn't know what's going on, but she's beating the price down, right? Like I'm doing the Spanish, and they're getting exasperated with me and back and forth, right? All the while this is going on, my wife is shopping, right? So then my wife comes up and says, I think we should replace this, and I think we should replace it here, and I think this is meaningful and valuable. So if you look at my wife's hand today, she has a ring that we purchased together in Puerto Vallarta while we were on the vacation with our family. So everybody walked away with a piece of jewelry, apparently, except for me, but that's all right. I walked away with a hat or something. I don't know. But that was so that was just this summer, and we replaced it.
And that's beautiful. And congratulations on your many years of marriage, and may God bless you many, many more.
Thank you.
And all I can say is let this be an example of righting wrongs and accountability and responsibility, but specifically speaking of repair for people who were enslavers and people who were enslaved, that there is opportunity for healing.
Yeah,
and take the time to explore what that looks like for you.
Then Angel did what was necessary and made sure y'all knew this man was on this journey because of his own heart.
Mr. Eli, I think, and I know that this is about everyone, and the fact that you are coming into a community of color, people will say, and so I'm going to go ahead and get that out there, he only is doing this because he's married to a Black lady, right? He doesn't genuinely mean this. She changed him, right, and made him this way. So I would like you to say in closing, as we let you free, because we've captured you this entire day, I would like for you to say what it has meant to you to stand up to your family, to right this wrong, and what it's meant to you personally. Even though your wife may have opened your eyes, it still was a personal journey, right? You had to make these decisions. So can you talk to us a little bit about what it has meant for you as an individual, as a white man, regardless of who and what your family looks like?
My wife was wonderful and gorgeous and amazing. But we met at a Black church, right? So I was there before her, like we met there, right? My life was changed as it relates to how I understand my identity and how other individuals understand their identity in college. I went to the University of Tennessee. I was involved in something called InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. At the time, they had two distinct and separate one collegiate Black Christians and one white one called Tennessee Christian Fellowship. We went on a retreat and we're like, I go to UT, I go to UT, you go to UT. So that then was the genesis of me saying, how do I continue to move in a direction? How do I make my life different and understand different perspectives? So I got involved with collegiate Black Christians. I got involved and started understanding in a very deeper way the lives and identity of Black folks that I'd never been exposed to. I made a huge, huge sacrifice that I didn't really make. And that was I got my hair cut by one of the Black guys at the school, right? So getting your hair cut as a Black dude, that's a big deal, right?
Yeah.
I didn't know that, right? Like, I'm like, whatever, right? So it seemed like a big sacrifice for me to go there and like, And it was like, oh, he got his hair cut with us. Like, yeah, what? Right? So what I did, though, was not move just in terms of relationships, because some of those people they were in my wedding. They're very close, dear friends of mine and my wife's today. But what that did was it laid the foundational work that I needed to continue to work, right? The work doesn't stop there, right? So for me, last summer, I read The Sum of Us by Heather McGhee. It's the story. It's this research where when we're dealing with our racial history and our context, we are better when we deal with the sum of us as opposed to being separated. It deals with the history of segregation and stuff in our history and unions and the role that they played. But whatever. My point is, there are pieces of moments where I have taken my own journey and taken my own responsibility, right? And there was every white person around the corner is reading White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, which is a good book. It really is. It really is a good book. But at the same time that you're doing those components in your journey, really the journey is about seeing human dignity in a culture that you have not been a part of. And when you see human dignity in a way that you have not been a part of, you get to understand this great cacophony of all of us in this world together in a much deeper way. And for me, ultimately, I know that in my person, I am the manifestation of my ancestors, and I take responsibility for that. And I am responsible to make repair. So as it relates to whatever wealth that I get passed on from my family, that is going to have a relationship to how I deal with Flat Rock Archives or how I deal with Carol, which I don't have a lot. Neither one of my parents have college degrees, but it doesn't matter. It's about how I understand that responsibility from where I've come from. So anybody who's white that's on this podcast or that's listening, my challenge will be more acute to you. Carol is gracious and kind and loving, but we should not be dismissive of the horrors in our racial past that our own great-great-grandfathers, great-great-grandmothers, and the fact that that is still living within pieces of our DNA. And we should not be dismissive for how wealth has been passed on generationally through the ownership of property and how we have been advantaged because of that. Therefore, how do we act for justice move forward is the question. And the question to move forward in justice is answered in seeing human dignity and worth everyone, valuing the differences in the cultural perspectives, learning and growing and moving forward for a better world. And the stakes are very high, because if not, we will tear each other apart, just like my ancestors did in their abuse of Carol's ancestors.
I can't say anything else.
After such a touching and profound message from Mr. Eli, I would have been remiss to not include parting words from Miss Carol Maybury, a remarkable woman from a remarkable family who has been able to keep their family legacy alive. Please hear her words.
I know that earlier Miss Kathy gave some advice, and I said it was a mic drop, right? I would love, Miss Carol, if you can give some advice on how young people of color can start approaching their lives and how, we say things like colonizers and enslavers and settlers, white people. How do you think that we can approach that with integrity, approach it from a place of compassion for those who are willing to make a difference, and also for those who are not, how can we stand and be an example to one another?
That's a good question. First of all, we need to know ourselves, because in order to pass the history on and forgive those who enslaved us, we have to know who we are. And in order to know who we are, we can embrace who they are. And you have to be forgiving, because you can't keep living with that under your conscience. And every time you approach someone who's a different race than you are, you still have to approach them with love. So it has to come to a point where you start to love people no matter what may have happened in the past, because you got to forget the past and move toward the future. So I believe our young people need to understand by reading more about our situation and how we came here and why. Because a lot of people, it's just like voting. If they don't know the history behind voting, they're not going to vote, because it said, what good is it if I vote? They're not going to listen to me. So you need to know that history in order to be able to repair going forward.
You got your mic drop turn. It's come full circle. Thank you both.
You're welcome.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for helping expose Flat Rock, Arabian Mountain, Lion Farm, because all of it makes a difference. There's not very many opportunities.
I think we should call it the Lion Plantation also.
Yeah.
I know there are people who want to call it the Lion Farm, but I think that's a little bit more true. Now go ahead. I apologize.
You know what? Look, you have to tell me twice.
Yeah,
Lion
okay,
Plantation.
Come on. I think we should call it the Lion Plantation also. I know there are people who want to call it the Lion Farm, but I think that's a little bit more true. Now go ahead. I apologize.
You know what? Look,
I just
you have to tell me twice. Lion Plantation.
Come on.
Right, that still has remnants of slave quarters, not just underneath the home, but across the way. History, heritage, hurt and healing. This is a unique story of racial repair and the creation of community between a descendant of slave owners and the direct descendants of the people his family enslaved.
I am literally saying again, as someone who in my being now carries within my DNA this responsibility, I'm saying I will commit to making these pieces right.